you're going to see eventually some clustering. I don't have a pointer, but there's a woman at around, there she goes, at 2 o'clock. Now she's going to the middle. She's going to gain a ton of weight and move to the middle of the network. And so you're going to see a tremendous amount of complexity as you follow this network across time. And James and I were sitting there after having spent 5 years to watch this video, and then you can see a cluster of obese and non-obese people in various parts of the network. But did you see this wave of obesity or not? We didn't see it. We were so depressed. I mean, we had spent so much time and effort, and we were convinced that our way of thinking about this was true. And when we saw this video, it was clearly not true, until we thought of some other thing that we had forgotten. And that is this, that obesity is not a unicentric epidemic, it's a multicentric epidemic. And the proper analogy is not a single pebble being dropped on the surface, but a whole handful of rocks being thrown onto the surface. Every rock falling onto the surface, plunk, 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 causes these little waves, but all these waves interfere with each other, and so you get a choppy surface. So if you think of social networks as this hyperdimensional surface, which is what they are, you get a lot of chop on this surface, and so you need other statistical techniques to disentangle and figure out what's really going on. So one of the tricks that we decided to use was, well, we used a variety of statistical tools, which I won't go into exactly, but we looked at how weight gain in me was associated with weight gain in other people across time. So if I gain weight from one moment to the next, how does it affect my friend's likelihood of gaining weight from that moment to the following moment? And we took advantage of another trick, which is as follows. Let's say that I say Matthew is my friend. Matthew could reciprocate the nomination, and we're going to call that a mutual friendship. Or I might say Matthew is my friend, and he might have no idea who I am. This was my experience in high school. I thought all these people were my friend, and they did not know who I was. We're going to call that an ego-nominated friendship. I'm the ego, he is the alter. And finally, Matthew might nominate me as a friend, and I might have no idea who he is. We're going to call that an alter-nominated friendship. Now think for a moment, in which of those three circumstances would Matthew's weight gain most likely cause my weight gain? The mutual friendship. We're very close friends. We hang out together a lot. I observe what he does. I'm very interested in what he's doing and so forth. Second, we would think the ego-nominated friendship, because I am respect Matthew, I'm following him, I'm interested in what he's doing. And last, if at all, the alter-nominated friendship, because Matthew says I'm his friend, but I have no idea who the hell he is. So, I'm not listening or following anything that he's doing. And the reason this is crucial is that the fast food restaurant opening up nearby will make me and Matthew gain weight at the same time. It doesn't care whether I nominate him or he nominates me. So if we find a patterning based on direction, it helps us exclude the possibility that there's this confounding factor that's mucking up our ability to see what's going on. And in fact, that's exactly what we found. Here on the top, we show the probability of what happens if Matthew gains weight on me, if it's me saying that Matthew's my friend and it's not necessarily a mutual friendship. An ego-perceived friend increases my risk of gaining weight by about 57%. A mutual friend by 171%, almost triples my risk if a mutual friend becomes obese, that I will follow suit in the same time interval. But an alter-perceived friend has no effect. So if Matthew nominates me and I don't think he's my friend, he gaining weight doesn't affect me. We find that same-sex friends have more of an effect and opposite-sex friends do not, so men are influenced by other men gaining weight and women by women, but not crosswise. Spouses and siblings have the effects described. Immediate geographic neighbors have no effect, and co-workers at workplaces affect you, but only at small workplaces, not at big ones. Now, there are many mechanisms that one can imagine for this effect. One possibility is that there's a spread of behaviors. So here the idea is that Matthew suggests to me, let's go have muffins and beer, which is a terrible combination. But if I adopt that eating habit, then maybe I'll follow suit and I'll gain weight as well. Another possibility is that what's spreading from between people is not an eating behavior, but rather an idea or a norm. Here the idea is that other people around me gain weight, and it resets my ideas about what an acceptable body size is. And so as they gain weight, I come to normalize weight gain, I gain weight and pass it along. Both of these things happen, but we find suggestive evidence in our analyses that the spread of norms is at least part of what's going on. Now, when we published our work, headline writers had a field day. In the United States, headlines read something like, packing it on, blame your fat friends. Now, the British headlines were rather interestingly different. They said, are your friends gaining weight? Perhaps you are to blame. And I think that's actually very telling contrast between the sort of American and British way of seeing the world. And I should say, incidentally, that none of the work that we've done, which is just an empirical description of the world, should be taken to justify any kind of prejudicial treatment of people of any particular body size. Okay? We're just trying to understand what's happening. Well, after we did this, we started exploring all sorts of other phenomena, and eventually we became interested in human emotions. Now, when we have emotions, we show them. Why do we show our emotions? Well, at least Americans show them. Brits a little less. But why do we show our emotions? Why aren't they just merely internal states? Well, if you think about it, and actually if you think about it, there would be an evolutionarily adaptive reason for us to have emotions, to be able to experience disgust or fear or anger or happiness. But we don't just have those experiences, we show them. And not only do we show them, but you can read them. And not only do you read them, but you copy them. There is emotional contagion that takes place in human populations. And in fact, this function of emotions suggests that whatever other advantages they offer, emotions also are a primitive form of communication. Now, we're accustomed to thinking about emotional contagion as being fleeting. Like, for example, I gave this talk in New York City recently, and I said, you know, when you're on the subway and someone smiles at you and you just instinctively smile back, and they looked at me and said, we don't do that in New York City. And I said, well, everywhere else in the world, that's normal human behavior. But you just instinctively smile when someone smiles. And of course, emotional contagion can be broader still, such as punctuated and broad expressions of anger, like in riots. But we became interested in whether emotions could spread beyond pairs of individuals and in a more sustained way than in riots. Could there be a kind of quiet riot, a kind of emotional stampede that's below the surface all the time in human populations or human social networks? Maybe emotions spread across network ties well beyond pairs and in a more sustained fashion all the time. And maybe, in fact, emotions have a collective existence, not just an individual existence, the way we're used to thinking of them. So this is one of our first pictures to study this phenomenon. We colored the dots now according to how happy people are. So yellow dots are happy people, and blue dots are unhappy people, and green dots are in between. The first network map of emotions that's been drawn, so far as I know. And if you look at this map, you immediately can see that there are clusters of happy and unhappy people within the network. And they also spread to 3 degrees of separation. So your happiness depends or is related to the happiness of your friends, 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 and your friends, friends, and your friends. In addition to the clustering that you can observe of happy and unhappy people, you might also discern that the unhappy people are more likely to be located in the periphery of the social network. So they are more likely to be on the edges of the network, and the happy people are more likely to be in the middle of the network. And so to invoke a different metaphor, if you imagine that social networks are like this, that I'm connected to you and you're connected to him and he's connected to her, on out endlessly into the distance, like a kind of vast fabric of humanity. If you imagine social networks as a kind of vast fabric of humanity, which is a quite reasonable thing to do, that fabric is like an old-fashioned American quilt, and it has patches on it, happy and unhappy patches. And whether or not you become happy depends in part on whether you occupy a happy or unhappy patch. So things spread in networks, and this has been shown for a variety of non-obvious phenomena by us and by others. We find that obesity, smoking, drinking, and drug use behavior, emotions like happiness, loneliness, and depression, sentiments like altruism, I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment, divorce, voting, advice referrals, and inventor ideas, all of these things spread, and all of them spread to roughly 3 degrees of separation, which is incidentally just a rule of thumb. We've also recently begun, it's not like necessarily the case. Some things go to 2 degrees, some to 4, some don't spread at all. But on average, things seem to spread to about 3 degrees of separation for reasons we describe in the book. And we've also begun to do some experiments. This work with emotions that we've done and how they spread have gotten us interested in other phenomena like altruism and how there might be a kind of pay-it-forward phenomenon, whereas if I'm kind to you, you're kind to others, and that could spread. And we have a paper that's forthcoming that looks at this using an experimental approach. But I should emphasize that not everything spreads, and not everything that spreads by the same mechanism. And both good and bad things can spread. A key idea about social networks is that they tend to magnify whatever they are seeded with. Fascism can spread in networks. Germs spread in networks. Happiness spreads in networks. Altruism spreads in networks. But they also have to be seeded with something. Networks don't create these phenomena. They take over and magnify other things, some other force that gets the thing started. So you could have a network population and no germ is introduced. When you introduce the germ, then you get the magnification of the network.
Now, this work with emotion